Hey everybody, I'm Asheville. Have you ever followed someone on social media just to find out that they were different than who you expected them to be in real life? You know, and I know, you can hardly tell everything about a person based on outward appearances. And it's possible that maybe, just maybe, it's the people that we underestimate the most who can actually add the most value to our lives. If you've ever wondered how to tell who someone really is, then stick around. We're going to talk about it. A while ago, there was a trend going around where hyper-realistic looking items were actually made of cake. The point is, on the outside, it may look like one thing, but on the inside, it's cake. But that's what makes them so intriguing. Your eyes tell you one thing, but the reality is totally different. We can do this with food, sure. But the truth is, we use what we see to draw conclusions about all sorts of different things. But maybe more than anything else, we do this with people. In fact, studies show that it takes just 7 seconds to make a first impression. And you can be sure that a large part of that first impression is based on how someone looks. It makes sense why we do this. Our brains like categories. We like labels. The faster that we can put someone in a category or a group, the less work our brains have to do. And let's just be honest, our brains are like us. They want to do the least amount of work possible. So slapping a label on someone as soon as we can is more than just convenient. It saves us energy. This is the way that people have always worked. In fact, there's a story told in the Old Testament of the Bible that talks about this very thing. A guy named Samuel was a prophet for God, which means that God would speak to Samuel, and then Samuel would communicate God's message to God's people. At this point in time, the Jewish people had just become their own sort of kingdom, and God had wanted to be their king. There was just one problem. The Jewish people didn't want to look strange to surrounding kingdoms. They wanted a human, flesh and blood king like all the other kingdoms had. So, a guy named Saul became their king. And Saul was great for a little while. But it didn't take long before being king started to go to his head. He quit representing God and leading the way that God wanted him to. So God told Samuel there would be a new king, and that Samuel was going to find him. The only problem was, God had not been very specific about who this new king would be, only what family he would come from. So Samuel heads to that family, Jesse's family, to find the next king of Israel. Here's what happened. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. In other words, Jesse's son Eliab looks like he could be a king. This son had to be the one that God wanted. But the author of Samuel says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." The story goes on. One by one, Jesse brings out his sons, all assuming that they had to be the next king of Israel. And over again, God tells Samuel, no, not this one either. The story sums up what all of us have experienced at one point or another. What we see makes us draw a conclusion that ends up being completely wrong. We size someone up, or someone sizes us up, and we make assumptions that are way off, all because of what we see or don't see. Samuel did it. Jesse did it. They missed what God could see. The problem is, you and I do this all the time. We make comparisons and we size each other up. We think that what we see or what we believe is the standard. It has to be right. But the truth is, God's judgment or God's standard is the only one that matters, and God doesn't make quick assumptions about people. So when we look at ourselves and we look at someone else, we might see a world of difference. But what does God see? God's image in us and God's image in them. Which all of that leads to an even bigger question. Okay, let's really talk about this. We might deny that we judge or look down on someone, but there's one test that reveals how we really see someone. Can you compliment the people you don't necessarily vibe with? Like, can you in all sincerity find something to hype up or celebrate about someone you consider really different than you? Can you see the image of God in those who you don't like? Those who annoy you? What about the people who you feel like are less privileged? people who are materially poor, people with different physical or cognitive ability or capacity, how do you see the image of God in them? Even more, when you see someone who has it easier than you, who you think of as less oppressed or as having a more privileged life, does that make you angry or resentful toward them? Do you believe the image of God is there in the people you dislike? That's where things get a little more complicated, right? It's hard to accept that someone who devalues others has value themselves. How do you handle knowing that everyone made in the image of God includes those who have done incredible harm to others, who have made you angry, or have even just annoyed you? God sees the bigger picture, and you are invited to see others the way that God sees them too. The thing is, we can make a judgment about someone and be way off, but we can also make a judgment about someone and totally nail it. That person or that group has gotten it wrong, has done something they shouldn't, and has rightfully earned the label that they have. But then, even then, God sees something in them that we can't always. What does God see? God sees that person as a beautiful creation and a person who is gifted the image of God. And let's be honest, that can be really hard for us to accept. There's a passage from the book of Psalms. This book is considered as poetry or even songs and can be found in what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and talks about this very idea. This psalm was written by King David, the son of Jesse that was chosen to be king after Saul. And he writes, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. As I was woven together in the dark of the womb, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God? They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me." It may be tempting to read that and relate to what David is saying because the same is true for us. God made us. God is with us. We are God's complex workmanship, and God sees us as precious and valuable. But here's the thing. Those aren't just truths that David wrote about himself and to make us feel good about ourselves. Those things are true for everyone, even the people we might not want it to be true about. God is with the person we don't like. God created your not-so-favorite teacher. God sees your annoying little stepbrother as precious. In other words, knowing that you're valuable to God is never meant to make other people less valuable to you. All people were created on purpose and for a purpose. And that means God's image is in each and every person we meet. God is deeply involved and part of every person's life. We might look at someone and see a bad decision maker, an annoyance, a frustrating personality, but God sees someone made in God's image. Everyone is someone made uniquely in God's image. So what do we do with this? How do we begin to see others like there may be more to them than we might first see? How do we begin to see others like they are made in the image of God? When it comes to our individual lives, we start where Jesus started, with love. Jesus tells us to love our neighbor. And these days, our neighbor can mean our actual neighbor next door or our global neighbor. We are so much more connected now than the world has ever been before, which makes seeing the image of God in others, no matter where they are in the world, easier to do. Not only is loving our neighbors something that Jesus asked us to do, it's something Jesus knew would not only be good for our neighbor, but good for us. When we withhold love or withhold acknowledging God's image in someone else, we end up missing out on how big God really is. It shrinks our view of God and limits our human experience. Here are a couple ways we can do this well. First, get to know your close by neighbors. This could be literal neighbors, desk neighbors in class, or even a school neighbor you haven't talked to much. Start with their names. Then strike up a conversation and get to know their families, their interests, their life experiences. Maybe you can start praying for them by name, or even asking them good questions to learn more about their lives. See if they have any needs that you can help meet. Be really brave and open yourself up to having them meet your needs too. Second, Get to know your distant neighbors. Get to know their stories, celebrate their culture, seek to understand their values. Find ways to learn from them so that you can see how they uniquely reflect God's image. Then figure out the needs of your distant neighbors and find real, tangible ways to meet them. And here's the challenge. Think outside the box. Think geographically as well as generationally. Think socially as well as financially. Even more, the group identity we are invited to as the church is more unique than anything else we will ever get a chance to be a part of. Why? Because from the very beginning, Jesus established the church to be the most diverse community of people coexisting together, surrounded by and held together by God's unconditional love. When we work together as the church, we show the entire world how big God's love is for all of creation, and we get to participate in the work that Jesus started here on earth. Everyone is someone made uniquely in God's image. That is great news, and it can shape so much of how we approach life. Living like this is true means looking to see God in each and every person that we encounter, no matter how different they might be from you, in how they look, in how they behave, or in how they believe. If you're really looking, then you can see God's image in them too. And as difficult as it might be to believe that's true, imagine living as if it was true. Imagine what would happen in your community if you started to see God in each and every person. You would be able to show others what a life following Jesus could look like. You could be a living example of the kindness, love, and patience that God offers everyone. Not only is that unexpected, it's what makes us unique as followers of Jesus. Think about your response to these questions when you head to small groups. Who is someone you have a hard time getting along with? And is there a way that you can see God's image in them?